members of the Turkish Academy of Management. Good afternoon, dear Professor Mintzberg. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and it's a real pleasure to have you with us today.
It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing together all these people.
Yes, that's our privilege to have them. And dear guests, on behalf of the Turkish Academy of Management, I'd like to extend my warm welcome to each of you. And it's wonderful to see such a diverse audience, including colleagues from Academy of Management and joining us from different parts of the world, as you see. And your presence here today reflects the global impact of Professor Mintzberg's work and the shared curiosity we all have for advancing management thought. Normally, Professor Mintzberg needs no introduction for many of us in Turkish and global management academia and among business administration students. His ideas have long shaped the way we understand organizations, strategy, and management or managing. But before giving the floor to our distinguished guest, I would like to take a moment to introduce him very briefly. It's certainly going to be a challenge for me to be brief, but I'll do my best. Professor Henry Mintzberg is the Cleghorn Professor of Management Studies at McGill University and one of the most influential thinkers in management. Since 1968, his work has reshaped how we understand managing organizations and developing strategies. With a PhD from MIT Sloan, he has authored 21 books, 184 articles, and earned 21 honorary degrees worldwide. His groundbreaking ideas challenge conventional management wisdom, emphasizing learning over rigid planning and practical experience over theoretical training. Beyond academia, he's an avid outdoorsman and a collector of beaver sculptures, proving that even the sharpest minds needs a little wilderness. Is that correct, Professor Mintzberg?
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Today, we are going to have the privilege of hearing directly from him, not just about the work, but also his perspectives of management and society. Especially, we would like to ask questions about the rebalancing society that you have already shown us. And this session is going to be designed to be interactive, so I encourage you all to actively participate. If you have a question or comment, you can use the raise hand function on Zoom or simply write it in the chat. We will just transmit that to Professor Mintzberg, and Professor Mintzberg will be very happy to engage with you both during and after his speech. And to get us started, by taking the privilege of being the moderator, I'd like to ask some questions. I would like to start with some questions, Professor Mintzberg. Your work often challenges the conventional wisdom in management and questions the stereotypes of the discipline. How do you decide on the topics or research questions you pursue, or what drives you to think beyond mainstream paradigms and develop new concepts?
I wish I knew. Things strike me, I guess. And as we go along and through discussion, the more interaction you have, the more problems, the more you become aware of issues within management or within society, and you get struck by them. How I choose what I address, I don't know. I think it's just kind of, I've always trusted my intuition, and And if I kind of have a strong feeling that something's important, I do it. If we take the case of rebalancing society, I published the book exactly 10 years ago in 2015. Um, but it started in 1991 when I visited Prague, and pundits in the US and elsewhere were arguing that capitalism had triumphed. And I didn't think capitalism had triumphed at all. I thought balance had triumphed, that the United States post-war was very balanced. It had, I mean, some people might argue with this, but it had high tax rates. It had very generous benefits for poor people. It was a very balanced society post-war, and the Soviet Union was utterly out of balance on the side of government. The US, by misunderstanding this, went out of balance ever since. And in 1991, I actually published an article arguing that three sectors, I didn't call it the plural sector at that point, but the community sector, but I argued that health is based on three sectors. So to get back to your question, ever since then, that's been central in my mind. I collected all kinds of material about it, published the book in 2015, which was quite a bit after 1991. Um, and ever since, I have been on a mission to get that message across. And just 5 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago, saying to my spouse, I should give up because I've been trying so hard and I get the message across to people who get in touch with me, but there's no general acceptance of it or understanding of it. And one day I joke that I'm going to publish a book called If You Don't Hear From Us in 4 Days, because I've probably submitted dozens of op-ed pieces to the New York Times, never succeeded. Sometimes it got close once or twice, but never succeeded. I think that's important. And now other people are starting to think more and more now with what's going on in the US, that it is important. Um, but I just stuck with it. I have very thick skin. I don't get upset by insults. If I think something's right, I just do it. And let me make another comment that will be familiar with people listening. In 1976, I published an article called Planning on the Left Side, Managing on the Right, about the role of two hemispheres in management. And Herbert Simon, to me, was the most significant, most revered scholar. And I ran it past him. It's all written up in a book with the correspondence with his permission, in a book called Mintzberg on Management. But I sent the piece to him, and he said, "Oh, it's a lot of bunk." And he was in cognitive psychology then, so he should know. And I had to decide whether it's a lot of bunk, or whether he was wrong. And I was convinced that he was wrong. So I
Yeah.
went ahead with it and never looked back. And I once sort of joked with Jim March, who, of course, published so prominently with Herbert Simon. Um,
Mhm.
I said, Jim, you and Simon, after you left Carnegie, sort of diverged. He got more and more sort of caught up with computers and how computers could think and all that kind of thing. And you got more and more playful with garbage can models and all that. So, but he would absolutely not criticize Simon at all. But I think March left on a better path, even though he wouldn't admit it in a way, than Simon did. So, why do I do what I do? Because I bump into or get blasted into
Mhm.
issues like what's going on now with imbalance in America, and I don't let go. And it's been 10 years, and I'm still trying to make that point about balance, but I won't
Mhm.
give up.
Yeah, that's. May I take you a little back further just to make sure that not only the intuition but also some experience. I recently revisited your reflections on the manager's job, folklore and fact, that goes back, and there was a conversation with Adi Ignatius for Harvard Business Review. Yeah. Nearly 50 years after the original article. Looking back, what led you to focus on, for example, managerial roles at the time? I mean, what inspired you to take direction? I mean, you are saying that you are reframing things, but it should be more than reframing the things. What do you say?
You're going to get very surprised by this answer. I have a doctoral student who's struggling to find a thesis topic. And I said to him, don't worry, because I lost 6 months trying to find a thesis topic. Okay. So what led me to study managing? This is going to surprise you, probably, but I didn't know what to do for my thesis at MIT after the general exams. And then Webb, who was running NASA, the space agency at the time, thought he was a good manager and he wanted to be studied. So he approached some professors at MIT.
Kanada'da yaşıyor bu herif.
Oh, yeah.
And he approached them to be. Are you okay with the screen? I don't. Anyway, you hear me?
Yeah.
So he approached them, and I was the only doctoral student remotely interested in management at the Sloan School of Management. There were no courses. There was just one course that came as I came, but there was no department of management or strategy. There was no courses. It was all marketing and finance and operations and so on. And so they approached me, and I said, "What are you, crazy? I'm going to do a doctoral thesis at MIT studying one guy. This is like suicide." Anyway, I was going to get this. This is also going to surprise you. Igor Anzov had just published his book called Corporate Strategy, and I thought, "Oh, good, I'll study." He had applied it to diversification decisions, and I thought I'll do a general model of Anzov's Anzov's approach to planning, but I couldn't find anybody to do it with. And luckily, I approached Bill Pounds, who was the dean at MIT, and he said, "Oh, you can't. I won't let you study us." And so I had no one to study. I couldn't just walk into a company and say, "I want to do strategic planning for you." So I lost my topic. Imagine if I had done that, my whole career would have gone in an opposite direction. But then the Webb idea came back to me, and I thought, all right, I'll study chief executives. And so Webb was no longer available because he had gotten embroiled in political problems. So I studied 5 other chief executives and walked into their offices and discovered that it wasn't anything what was described in planning, organizing, coordinating, and controlling, the old POS score, Benoni Fayol stuff, and so on. And so I simply wrote down what I saw. It was pretty obvious. It was easy stuff, And I just, they were getting interrupted a lot. So I wrote that down. They were meeting a lot of people outside their, spending half their time outside their organizations. That wasn't planning or organizing, coordinating or controlling. So I wrote it all down, and then everybody got very excited, like, wow, I don't think it was genius.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was going to ask another question that you have already opened up your emphasis on emergent strategy and learning over rigid strategic planning despite strong opposition from Professor Ansov. It reminds me of the classic debate between Pale and Taylor.
Yeah,
that goes back some time. Are you creating some ideas into readable and impactful work as they emerge spontaneously, or do you follow a structured process? As far as I see, you are not following a structured process with a set of research agenda. It just comes through. Am I correct?
Yes and no. You're correct, despite my own intentions. First of all, let me say a word about emergent strategy. That came from Herbert Simon indirectly.
Oh, okay.
That idea came from Herbert Simon because I read a sentence he wrote that talked about strategy as pattern.
Mhm.
And that just blew my mind wide open because I thought if strategy is pattern, then we have a way of studying strategy by looking at pattern out of the past instead of plan into the future, because it's always defined as plan into the future, but you can't study that very easily. I mean, you can study what people do, but if they don't come through with their, execute their plan, then what are you left with? Whereas I could study strategy as pattern out of the past, and so I wrote a book called Tracking Strategies about that, and did that. Now, spontaneity and research agenda. I started with a very determined research agenda. I was going to write a book called The Theory of Management Policy because I didn't think there was a general book on that. And so I laid it all out. And in fact, the first time I taught in the MBA program at McGill, every week I was trying to write a chapter on parts of this book: managerial work, structure, strategy, decision making, and so on and so forth. Well, the chapters of this book ended up becoming books in their own right. And so my thesis became The Nature of Managerial Work. The chapter on structure became a 500-page book called The Structuring of Organizations. The chapter on power became a 700-page book.
Power in around
Power.
organizations.
Yeah, and the chapter on strategy became about 3 or 4 different books, and so on. So, and a couple of years ago, you can see under if you go to mintzberg.org/articles, you can see an article I did on that original book and that original work that I did recently. But spontaneity has been a major part of this too, I think. As I said, I visited Prague and spontaneously. And now I've got an article I'm awaiting acceptance about serendipity, called is serendipity serendipitous? Um, Arguing that serendipity is not serendipitous. We expect spontaneity and we expect surprises to come all the time. And much of what happens in the world, we can expect, we might not know what surprise to expect, what particular surprise to expect, but we can certainly know that we should expect surprises, that the world is made up of people who take advantage of surprises.
But that's that. Yeah, that when I first hear about the serendipity, the concept of serendipity from your blog, your LinkedIn message, it was really interesting to understand what's going on from my perspective, from my studies. And that's why I was planning to ask you whether you have multiple research questions in the pipeline at any given point in terms of your studies, or do you prefer to focus sequentially?
Santa,
After all,
in the middle of the Zoom.
pardon? Yeah,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah. Do you have multiple research questions in pipeline, or do you prefer to focus sequentially after you develop the ideas or the research questions in your mind?
Yeah, I unlike my 6 months of trying to find a doctoral thesis topic, I have not lacked for for research or writing topics ever since. Yeah, I have a number of things in the pipeline right now. My publisher wants me to do a book on kind of myths. I've seen my career as reframing. Uh, Everything I've done has been reframing in one way or another. I reframe managerial work. I reframe strategy to see it as pattern instead of plan. I reframed management education as social learning. I've done a lot of reframing. So we're going to do a book on sort of what the myths are and what the reality is, because that's the tone in which I've written so much, that here's the myth and here's the reality. So we're going to do a whole book on short little excerpts. That's one thing in the pipeline. A pamphlet now called For the Sake of Survival, which is the third stage of rebalancing society. Two parts of that are written, and the third part needs to be written. I'm doing an article that I'll submit to the BMJ, British Medical Journal, called The Case for Cause, because I've done some healthcare stuff over the years, and I think we don't give enough attention in research to cause as opposed to cure. If we understand cause, we may not need to cure. So we need to do more work on cause. So I'm making an argument for that. That's mostly written. Different things like that.
That's, yeah, as you can see, we are very eager to uncover the secrets behind your intellectual productivity, Henry. That's always very interesting questions for us and for our PhD students. But at this time, let me not occupy the time of the participants, and for a while we will return to the questions at chat. Meral, may I see them and just ask to Henry about those? I'm going.
Yes, Professor, I see one question came from one of the participants.
Okay.
It was about balance from Steph Sharma. Steph Sharma, would you like to ask directly to Professor Mintzberg?
That will be better, yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much to all of you for hosting this and Dr. Mintzberg for being here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, very clearly.
Okay, thank you. I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the sun is shining bright.
Okay.
Today, how would you define societal balance, Dr. Mintzberg? And then what are some examples of societies going from imbalance to balance? And is there an opportunity to capitalize on imbalance, such as nonlinear dynamics suggests, where we have a constant state of imbalance, almost like emergent strategy, but can we capitalize in your perspective?
Whoa, good questions. I don't think I've changed my view of what balance is. I think I've articulated it better, but I don't think I've changed it. My argument has always been that a healthy society has respected governments that are respected, businesses that are responsible, and communities that are robust. And of course, we know about two-sector society, left, right, business, government going back and forth. We don't recognize community, but de Tocqueville, who wrote about democracy in America in the 1830s, or published it in the 1830s, certainly understood the role of, he didn't use the word community. I was just looking up this morning in the index to his books. He referred to associations, but they're essentially community associations, like political parties and different things. And to me, that's balance. I was hoping you would ask me about countries that went from balance to imbalance, because that's easy. But you're asking me about countries that went from imbalance to balance. Well, let me say first of all that I use the democracy index as a surrogate for balance. Their first category, they have four categories of democracy, and the first one is called full democracies. And there are about 25 countries listed there. And shockingly, or maybe not shockingly, all the first ones, all the upper ones, the most balanced in the world, according to that index, are all tiny, every one of them. All the Scandinavian countries, New Zealand, and then there are countries like Costa Rica or Uruguay, or I don't know if they're still on the list. I think probably are, but Botswana. So sort of small, but also on the list, or have been on the list. And so there's no shortage of balanced countries. Now, many countries have gone out of balance. particularly those that bought into liberal democracy and allowed business interests to dominate public interests. Now, who has gone from imbalance to balance? I could probably answer that question, but not off the top of my head. I'm trying to think of countries. Any occur to you offhand? I mean, there were examples, I think, of countries that restored. Well,
Spain. No?
Spain, yes, exactly. And how about the Ukraine? After the Ukraine became rather more democratic, so made its way back to balance. So yes, Ukraine would also be an example. And then the other part of your question is about coupling, consolidating. Can you say it again a bit, the last part?
Yeah, really just curious if there's a way to capitalize. Maybe that's not the right word. I feel like that's kind of antithetical, but to capitalize on the imbalance. So if we're facing a space of imbalance, say in America right now, is there a way to capitalize on that or utilize that or harness it?
Well, what an opportunity Trump could have had or still can have, because he was elected to do just that, wasn't he? I mean, he wasn't elected by the titans of Wall Street to feed them lower taxes, although that's what he's doing. And he wasn't elected to cut the protections for the very beleaguered people who voted for him. He was elected largely by the beleaguered people of America to restore trust and balance. So I wrote a blog about his legacy and said, hey, not that he's reading me, but hey, Mr. Trump, what's going to be your legacy? Do you really want your legacy to be the annexation of Greenland? Is that what you want your legacy to be? How about your legacy being saving your country from itself? Because it's so out of balance. And I'm not against business. I'm just against business that has so infiltrated government that everything is for sale. Everything is for sale. And the lobbying has become utterly distorted. So America today is no better balanced in some respects than China under communism or Russia under populism.
Yeah. Well, then is it a good idea to talk about the national culture? Are they rooted in the national culture or the sociology of countries, or something stemming from the soul of the time, or the development level of the societies?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. Russia has certainly suffered from sort of dominance and lack of democracy virtually forever, I guess. And that could be something rooted in the nature of their society. On the other hand, I think Britain and America, the UK and the US, are the liberal democracies most out of balance in a certain respect. Okay, so Britain now has a Labour government, but the Conservatives had to do enormous amount of destruction to enable Labour to capture Parliament again, whereas in the United States, these two countries are dreadfully out of balance, and other countries that are following suit, so-called liberal democracies that are following suit, are becoming less liberal and less democratic. So Canada maintains a balance, but we're still dragged that way, much less so than the United States, but we're still dragged that way. I think Germany and France sustain a certain amount of balance, but again, dragged that way by look. John Kenneth Galbraith wrote a book about countervailing powers, how unions rose up to countervail against corporations. Globalization is economic. There's two forms of globalization. Economic globalization is totally dominated by by the big corporations. There is no countervailing power. There's nothing to stand up to the big corporations internationally. In fact, the major countries like the US or China become cheerleaders for their own global corporations rather than challenging the power of globalization, the concentrated power of economic globalization. So this is a kind of severe problem in the world today. And then political globalization is dominated by three superpowers. And the only reason that Russia gets any attention at all is because it has all those nuclear weapons. Otherwise, I won't say it, otherwise somebody will come and bomb my house or something. Anyway.
Okay. Shall we turn to the hands raised? Then we will come back to
the general case is that dogmas develop. We call them paradigms, but they're kind of dogmas, and they develop, and often they develop to suppress people who come along with new views, and it takes a new generation to force out the old generation, or not force out, but force out the ideas of the old generation. So, I faced that to some extent because, I was a kind of rebel who was opposed to a lot of the conventional, very technocratic and very centralized views of management. Today, I don't have that problem because, if anything, I'm probably more on the establishment side in the sense that the younger generation, I wasn't doing these kind of podcasts, or not that they were available then, but I wasn't listened to early in my career the way I'm listened to now because there's been a swing to another thing. And maybe now we're the problem. Maybe people are trying to get ordinary things across, or conventional views of management across are being suppressed. So yes, we need to fight that. It's no better in academia. I shouldn't say that. It can be no better in academia than it is in politics. And we need to do something about that.
Okay. Let me pass the word to Ebru.
Thank you, dear Professor. Professor Mintzberg, it's an honor for us to have you here. Thank you very much to you and to the Turkish Academy of Management. I'm a big fan of you, so I'm very excited. On the organizational level, I'm very interested in organizational learning area. And also as a management consultant, I see companies not being able to learn as an organization most of the time, at least in my country. So my question goes as follows. How do you think organizational learning has evolved and is going to evolve in the future? And is it still an attractive area in practice and for academia? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. A very clever Dane, or apparently two or three of them, said, I never predict, especially the future. And the trouble with prediction is that optimists predict what they like and pessimists predict what they don't like. So I can't predict for you, but what I can say is what I hope for. And obviously, like you, we admire organizations that learn. I mean, those are healthy organizations. Not that all organizations have to learn in a broad sense. If whoever made these glasses knows how to make these glasses, I don't care if they come up with some brand new way of making me see better. I just want them to get better and better at making these glasses so I can buy them 3 pairs for $15. So they don't all have that. They all have to learn at the base level. They all have to get better and better, and that's what the Japanese were so brilliant at, and are. But broad learning is more sort of a macro issue in a way, that we need more and more entrepreneurial companies that learn in a broad way. I'm not a fan of what Amazon has become, because I think its website is just confusing as hell. But its operating system is unbelievable. I mean, talk about organizational learning. It's extraordinary. I used to get things delivered in 3 days. Now I if I get them in before 8 o'clock at night, I have them the next day. I mean, it's amazing what they've done in that regard, and lots of other companies have done similarly amazing things. The great entrepreneurial companies. I was asked by Forbes magazine a couple of years ago to name the best and worst CEO of the year, of the past year, and I nominated Musk for both, because what he did in Tesla was absolutely brilliant. How this guy could come along out of nowhere and create an automobile company out of nothing that becomes worth more than the other automobile companies is phenomenal. But in Twitter, I mean, that's where his knowledge was. His knowledge was devoted there. But in Twitter, which I call Twixer with a capital X, in Twitter, he's been dreadful because he doesn't understand that business. And that represents the divide in American business and probably business everywhere, which is that the economy really rides on these great entrepreneurs who do amazing things and still do, but not on the established companies that remain that remain dogged and old-fashioned and exploitative. Frankly, I think if anything could fix capitalism, and by the way, when I talk rebalancing society, the US usually talks about fixing capitalism. I've got a collection of 17 forms of fixing capitalism: conscious capitalism, collective capitalism, balanced capitalism, this capitalism, democratic capitalism, this capitalism, that capitalism. But capitalism needs fixing. That won't fix an imbalanced America. But the way to fix capitalism, I think, is maybe to just close down the goddamn stock markets altogether. They're so dysfunctional. Or at least correct the short-term, narrow profiteering. Somebody who buys the stock in the morning and sells in the evening owns the company, and somebody who works 30 years in the company doesn't own the company. What an awful thought that is. So the stock market is utterly dysfunctional, and I wrote a piece. It's in my book called Bedtime Stories for Managers, which in Bedtime Stories I talk about from enterprise to corporation, where and from exploring to exploiting. And the story goes that the company did an IPO and went on the stock market, and it describes how it destroyed the company.
Hey, yeah, that's your book about bedtime stories for managers. It's really when I first you were discussing with your YouTube talk with Alex Fergmani. Am I correct on that?
Alex
Fergmani.
How do you spell
it? Fergmani. There's a very, very nice YouTube video
this might have been a podcast. Is that what you mean?
Yes, yeah. And in that one you are discussing bedtime stories and also management education.
Right.
The developments in management education, and it is really what was the idea behind these stories? When I first looked at this book, I remembered Only the Paranoid Survive by Andy Grove, Intel's CEO. Yes, yeah.
I'm allowed to do a little promotion.
Yes, yeah, that's amazing book. That's amazing book. And what was the idea putting in that way? But why did you call that bedtime stories for managers?
Well, first of all, I felt that my ideas could be helpful to managers if I brought them together in a way that was comfortable for them to read it. because I didn't think I've gotten through enough to practitioners. I'm happy with my academic colleagues like today, but I didn't think I'd gotten through enough for practitioners. So I decided to do a collection. I forget why we called it. It just came up sort of spontaneously about bedtime story. Oh, I know how it came up. I had an operation and was in bed for a while, and I got a hold of a book called 101 Stories About the Canadians. The Canadians are the Montreal hockey team. The Canadiens, they're called the Habs for habitants, farmers. And I loved that book because like every night I could read a 2-page story, and I wasn't that well, so I was recovering. And every night I would read a 2-page story, and I thought, yeah, we could do the same thing with bedtime stories for managers. Every night they could read one. So I wish the 300 of you would tell your practitioner colleagues about this, because the book hasn't done that well. It's done fine. In China, it does well.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah,
That's
China.
amazing.
China's my best, and Russia. China's my number one market probably in the world. Not probably. Russia's high. Japan is high. Yeah. The
For
US
practitioners,
the
for
US is
practitioners,
low. What's that?
For practitioners, that
Yeah.
should be amazing source of ideas, creativity, and all things. But US is not very, as far as I see, very fruitful on following your ideas and the intellectual products you have already.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that because I think there are Americans already appearing here.
Okay.
Who obviously are different, and there's plenty of Americans who
Okay.
like just proportionately. My star. I'll give you an idea. When my publisher published the bedtime stories in Chinese, I think it was that book in Mandarin, he held a podcast live, and 50,000 people came on live. 50,000 people. A few days later, did the same thing in Russia, and 11,000 people came on. That's more in Russia proportionately than in China. Okay. Go find an interview with me. I've been interviewed by the head of Nikkei, for example, the finance publications in Japan, and I'm having another interview coming up next month in Japan. I've never been interviewed, or at least been a long time, in the Wall Street Journal, even the Financial Post in Canada. That's like I don't exist.
Okay.
In Quebec, by the way, Les Affaires, which is the equivalent, has been regular and nice.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we continue with you, Yiğit? You raised your hand. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
By the way, I'm okay to continue if you are. We don't have to stop at 2 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. That's very kind of you.
I'm having too much fun to end this.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you, dear esteemed Professor Mintzberg. Together with my PhD advisor, Professor Kadir Varoğlu, we examine competitive strategies in highly regulated industries, such as defense industry, and we found that large organizations become more competitive by working closely and more flexible with their ecosystem partners and joining shared strategic programs rather than relying on the traditional generic strategies. Based on these findings, we suggest a new strategy for agile integration into the ecosystem, which addresses the gaps we identified in Porter's generic strategies. So in this scope, how do you see an emergent strategy fitting into such a well-established and regulated industries? We will greatly value your opinion and would like to include your feedback in our thesis. Thank you.
Okay. Where are you, by the way?
From Ankara, Turkey, Türkiye Başkent University, and thank you for all my academic professor, my university, and Turkish Academy of Management, by the way.
Okay. By the way, years ago we were in Istanbul, and then we decided we don't like big cities that much. I mean, we liked it for a few days. So we flew to the far, far east. I forget the name of the town there. And
Van or
yeah,
near
Van.
lake? Van,
Yeah,
yes.
we went to Van. We
yes,
rented a car and
that's
went all over that area.
Good choice.
It was a
Very good
quiet
choice.
time, but the military was still, we drove over a pass. One day I got out of the car and the military came out of a pillbox and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" And then when we got
Nowadays,
to
that's
Van,
better.
in Van, there was a family having a picnic and they sent their child running across the field to give us some food from their picnic.
Yes.
Very nice
Yeah.
memories.
Okay.
There's a chapter in my new book. I have all sort of this one. We haven't talked about this yet, but my new book called Organizations Outward Bound. And I think the idea of partnerships, one of the things that really shocked me in a way, although it's obvious when you think about it, but I hadn't thought about it till I wrote the book, which is that the popular strategies in the literature and through the 80s and maybe even today in a way, but the popular strategies for large corporations were diversification and vertical integration. And what you did, either through internal development or through acquisition. But the boundaries of the corporation were absolutely firm. You bought your suppliers if you vertically integrated, or you bought your customers, or you diversified by buying companies in other industries or developing new industries, new areas yourself. But the boundaries were absolutely firm. And it occurred to me what's been going on for the last 30 years or so is all kinds of forms that have taken those boundaries down, including platform organizations and joint ventures and partnerships of all kinds and all sorts of things. And so what you found in your thesis, I think jives with that, conforms to that in the sense that organizations that are open to these partnerships and open to learning and open to new ideas and build themselves up are the successful organizations. That's one of the tragedies of what Trump is doing today, as people are describing America was the open society. America welcomed scientists and brilliant people and regular people and entrepreneurs from all over the world. And he's trying to close that down. It's absolute craziness. And by the way, Canada is today what America was back then. Canada is the wide open society and very balanced, very healthy society as a result. And we're multi-ethnic. We pride ourselves in multi-ethnicity. And we have two major national languages. We don't have to pass a silly sort of thing that we should have one major national language,
Yeah, that's very interesting that I was going to touch upon. When I was in Canada in 1990s, I first encountered discussions on bilingualism and multiculturalism. That was the first time I thought about these things, and it is very pity that hearing my director was telling me from Operation Research and Analysis Establishment of DND was telling this is not US. They are creating a melting pot.
Yes.
Canada will not do that. I remember right now, even now that what he was telling me. Keith Kavanaugh, that he was excellent as a manager, and Keith was telling me that that is something unique to Canada, and I'm very happy that hearing that continues.
Well, the new generations integrate, and if you watch TV or whatever it is, the number of second generation Indians, for example, and people from the Middle East and so on, who are prominent in the country, obviously they're totally integrated, and yet they're not. We Kadir, when you first started talking, you talked about global. So you mentioned something about global, and I wanted to say I'm bigger on worldly than global. Global to me sounds cookie cutter, the same. Everybody's supposed to be identical. Worldly is a wonderful word in English that means getting into other people's worlds so you can understand your own world better. If you're worldly, you're not the same as everybody else. You're simply accustomed and attuned to other worlds, and therefore your own world becomes that much, you understand your own world that much better.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
you.
Meral, shall we continue with what's written on the chat board? Meral, do you hear me?
Hocam, may I ask a question?
Please. Yeah.
I would like to focus on, again, management and organizational studies and refreshing our thoughts and insights. Professor, today I saw your critique of the if you can't measure it, you can't manage it mindset. So I find it's quite powerful. In this kinds of, I mean, in organizational environments where qualitative factors like trust, culture, or motivation are very difficult to measure. So how would you advise managers to better manage such intangible factors without falling into the trap of over-reliance on metrics?
Yes, there's a word in the dictionary I could check, but I think it's still there, called judgment. I think it's still there. I don't think they took it out yet. And that's kind of my short answer. In a way, we can't get past judgment, especially under these circumstances. Yes, measure what we can and rely on it when it's reliable, but be careful because it can be unreliable. But we have to judge, and we have to have people have good judgment and good intuition. We can't get past that. I just posted on behalf of our friend Musk. I posted on my blog a couple of days ago, yesterday, mintzberg.org/blog, sort of what I used to call note on that dirty word efficiency. Because when I say to people that a restaurant is efficient, they almost, in English at least, the word worked that way, they almost inevitably say you're talking about speed of service. When I say my house is efficient, they say you're talking about cost of heating. Well, whoever bought a house for the cost of heating, and how many times do you go to a restaurant for the speed of service? What people do subconsciously, not consciously, is when you say efficiency, they zero in on what's measurable. And some things, economic things, are more measurable than social things, and some economic things are more measurable than others, and some social things are more measurable than others. And so when we rely on measurement, we tend to distort our decisions. We can distort our decisions. So people can look that up and read it. So yeah, we need measurement. And you know, I've always been big on numbers ever since I was 10 years old and could tell you that Bob Feller had the fastest fastball in baseball at 94 miles an hour. I remember that number to this day, although it's probably wrong, but that's what I remember. So I'm big on numbers. I love numbers, but be careful.
Yeah. Okay. We have a raised hand by Mehmet. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all the people who had planned and organized this great opportunity to meet my can be called a mentor from maybe, yeah, he doesn't know that, but he did mentored me with especially this paper of you, Professor Mintzberg. I was preparing I was working on my PhD thesis dissertation, and I've read your paper, this developing theory about the development of theory. and that was that shaped my mind. And you know, it's like I'm a big fan of you, and I don't know if there's any part of the management area that you haven't contribute somehow. And it's great honor, and I'm really excited. And yeah, my voice is shaking right now. So
Very
yeah,
excited.
yeah, I'm really excited.
Let me tell you two things. Number one, I don't bite. And number two, even on, especially on Zoom, I can't bite.
Great.
Yeah.
And so Professor, I was studying strategy, and the main question of what strategy is, thinking on it and working on it, reading on it, brought me to this management area. And nowadays, I see things have changed drastically. There are this disruptive changes in technology, like AIs and generative AIs and general AIs, and not today of this technology, but the future of this technology promises something really disruptive. Maybe will make us discuss the meaning of managing and strategizing and so on. So the main discussion, what strategy is, you know, there's Ansoff, there's you, and there's others. And now this discussion evolves, as I can see. And what is the direction of this discussion? So is there a clear understanding of the concept strategy? What will it be in the future with AIs and other disruptive technologies? So how should we look at this picture today of this picture and the future of this picture? Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm happy to mentor you, having mentored you, and I'm glad you mentioned developing theory about the development of theory, because it's my favorite of my own papers by far, and it's on my website. If you go to mintzberg.org and you look under of interest, you'll see the paper that you can download. I love that paper because it's totally different from anything I've ever done. As I said earlier, optimists predict what they like and pessimists predict what they don't like. And nobody gets discontinuities right. We can predict, I can predict there'll be snow on the ground in this city in January. I can't predict that there's I couldn't have predicted that there's a snowstorm due tomorrow in Montreal or in a couple of days in April. But it happens once in a while. What we can predict are regularities, and we can't predict discontinuities. Nobody can predict discontinuities. Thomson Sr. is reported to have claimed in 1948, I think, that there's a world market for 5 computers. This is the guy who exploited that market more than anybody, and he didn't get it at the beginning. He just got it before everyone else, or better than everyone else, but he didn't get it at the beginning. So what will AI do? You know, I almost prefer not to know or care, because is anybody gonna, people have to care, obviously, but is anybody gonna get it right? I don't know. I don't know. And I can't help you with that. To predict the future of the field of strategy, you know, strategy knew what it was about after Chandler wrote his book in, I think, 1964, and we knew and sort of defined the field. And Ken Andrews picked up on that and had a model they called the design school of strategy. Then Porter came along in 1980 and proposed a rather analytical view of strategy, of developing strategy in the spirit of strategic planning, but more positioning. And I think Porter's work was brilliant. I also think that analysis feeds into the strategy process. It doesn't give you a strategy. When Porter claimed that I favor a set of analytical techniques for developing strategy, I responded, nobody in the history of the earth has ever developed strategy through analytical techniques, because strategy is about synthesis. It's not about analysis. Now the Porter phase is certainly not past, but is not what it was. We had a famous humorist who was a professor of economics at McGill, named I'm blanking on the name, but anyway, he one of his claims was he raced out of his house, ran off, leaped on his horse, and ran off in all directions, and rode off in all directions. Stephen Leacock rode off in all directions. Strategy is riding off in all directions right now, so I'm not sure where it's going to end up.
Yeah, that's that. Continuing with this point, Zübeyde has a question, and I'm going to change it a little bit with the impact of AI on organizational design. When we go back to
Just a sec, Santa, I'm still on the call.
The Galbraith star model, are we going to take into consideration in a different way, different mode, the AI, the developments in or digitalization trends in the world, how it's going to be create an impact on organization design procedures?
I just have to repeat, I'm stumped by the whole thing. I don't work in that area. I have taken advantage of it in certain respects and used it in some respects, and now I want to use it in the paper I'm doing on cause and cure, to be able to get at how much attention has gone into cause and cure. So I see some use for it. When people fear for it, there's another blog I did called "What is Dumbing Us Down?" It goes to everything that's going on in society today. It didn't take AI to dumb people down about so many other things. It didn't take, dumbing down for people to elect monsters to head their governments and then pay the price for it in horrible wars and other things. People were conned into going with all kinds of stupidity. And what's dumbing them down? I offer 5 kind of hypotheses in that piece. I think internet might be dumbing us down. Everything is short term and quick and so on. I think chemicals in our bloodstream, little plastic particles or whatever, could be dumbing us down. Harari claims that the farther we get from nature, he doesn't use that word, but in effect, the more dumb we get. So we had plenty of reason to be dumbed down before AI came along. Will this make it worse? Probably won't make it better given our history. But who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, we're going to wait for a while and to create, to make different types of ideas to develop on AI and its impact, rather than creating some kind of relationship, exact relationship.
Can you excuse me for a sec? I realize why Santa's called downstairs.
Sure,
I'll be back in 1 second.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah. Okay, that's in the meantime, may I ask you, Meral, anything we need to pass? I'm just trying to follow up, but I couldn't.
Hold on 1 sec. I just have to call Santa.
Yeah, go ahead, please. It's okay. Meral, anything we want to pass to Henry about as a question right now?
Ayfer, Professor,
yeah, you have already. Yeah, Ayfer, go ahead, please.
Professor Mintzberg, also I'm very excited to have the opportunity to engage with you directly My question is related to strategy and board of directors, organizational level. As far as I know, traditional views suggest that the boards should primarily on long-term strategic planning, and in practice, generally boards tend to focus primarily on financial performance and executive oversight. But where the primary role of the board is monitoring, boards may often become disconnected away from day-to-day realities of the organization. What do you think should be done to strengthen the strategic roles of boards? What should their, on the other hand, what should their boundaries be? Would it be appropriate to be involving in daily decisions of the organizations, or to what extent? Thank you.
Yeah, I won't go into detail, but in my book called Power in and Around Organizations, which is out of print but available as a PDF for free on my website, if you just find the book under books on my website, or under of interest on the right side of the homepage. Basically, I argue the board's role is to choose the chief executive and leave that person run the company. Boards can't do strategy. They can comment on strategy, they can interact, but they can't do it. So I won't get into detail now, but if you just, the book looks like this, and
Yeah.
there's a chapter called Board of Directors.
I will share that book with Ayfer. That's excellent book, and we have it in my library.
Yeah.
Thank you, my Professor Varoğlu also.
Yeah, that's there is a group of PhD students working on the board of directors and their impact on strategizing, let me say, with your wording. That's why it's very it will be very important to look at the Power in and Around Organization book. Look at your book on that.
Good.
Okay. Salva, yeah, you go ahead, please. Yeah, please. Open your, yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you so much for insights, and I am also excited to meet you in person, even though it is online. My question actually is my shift. My thought actually shifted toward business education a little bit in these recent years. And my question would be more aligned with aligning the businesses with the business education and the stakeholders' involvement within the business schools, especially in like strategic management area or any other areas actually. But specifically what we are trying to do is create strategies and for the business sector mainly. And but we do have a little bit of difficulty, I think, in business schools that involved with the stakeholders within these business schools. Do you have any thoughts on that one? That's one question. Second question is, I really enjoyed when you said that your area of interests are different areas, and that brings some richness to the research. And I think that in general, in the old way of business schools, we do tend to go only in one direction and do our research in one line of work. But I think that expanding that horizon to different areas brings richness to business theory. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm not sure what to comment on the second, except to agree. On the first, I'm in a management school. We're called a management school, which means some years ago when we developed the healthcare program, we asked how many people were interested in healthcare or healthcare organizations, and I think 20 some odd of them expressed interest. And I always wondered if I asked how many people were interested in business, whether we'd get that many. So we're, if you mean by stakeholders, different kinds of organizations, different needs. Certainly, the role of the business school is to be eclectic. The role of any university is to be eclectic and to have a variety of opinions. So I think that's all. I think that's all kind of helpful. I'm not sure I can add more.
Okay. There is a question on the Meral, may I read that? Henry, this is a question from is the way we are organized as nations with explicit focus on economic growth, prioritizing individual, firm, or nation profits, leading to this societal imbalance over time? And I think he's from India, Raghavan.
Yeah.
He apologizes that the connection is bad. That's why he put over there.
Yes, I think it's all part of the imbalance. I think we're social creatures as much as we're economic creatures. You know, years ago, I looked at the federal government of Canada, and just about a huge disproportion of departments were economic, and especially the ones that had all the or most of the power. It was as if government existed for economic development and nothing else. I think individualism runs rampant in many countries today and much of the world. It starts with somebody who, I'm on the highway and I'm passing in the outside lane, and somebody comes up against me and starts honking his horn. It's usually a him. And I'm kind of saying, look, the speed limit is 100 kilometers an hour. I'm doing 120 kilometers an hour. I'm passing a car, and you're saying, get the hell off my highway. Well, I'm sorry, it's not your highway. We have individualism running rampant in all kinds of ways. And, I'm as much individualistic as anybody, but we need to balance our communal needs, our collective needs, as well as our individual needs. And that's all part of the imbalance. A new part of the pamphlet I'm working on now. Did I mention the pamphlet? And for the sake of survival, I'm doing I think I mentioned a third. Anyway, I mentioned somebody today, but a third sort of crack at the rebalancing society is a pamphlet I'm doing called for the sake of survival. And one thing that's new in there, and one thing that's new in there is balance among ourselves, that we have three basic needs using Maslow and reducing it a bit. We have the need for consumption, we have the need for protection, and we have the need for affiliation. And they have to be balanced too. I better just look at my schedule because the alarm went off and I didn't know if I had anything right now, but I just want to make sure. Yeah, it's okay. No, it's okay.
Okay. Now, shall we link that to communityship? That's another word you have already proposed. Communityship.
Yeah, ahead of leadership, because leadership is a very individualistic. If you talk about rampant individualism, the word leader and leadership refers to individuals. When you say leader, leadership, you don't think collective, you think an individual. And no matter how generous that individual is, it's overly focused on a single person. So I kind of coined the term communityship in an article I did in the Financial Times long ago. And I think communityship ahead of leadership. Communityship drives leadership. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt was approached by a black activist to support his cause, Roosevelt said, I know I want to do it, go out and make me do it. In other words, communityship drives leadership.
Yeah. Okay. We have some hands raised.
Before that, Professor Varoğlu, before
yeah.
that, we have a question, another question in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yes. A question from RK. In the process of any of your research project, at what stage do you engage with extant literature? Right in the beginning of the project or after you explore the phenomenon, data collection? And what would be your advice to PhD students and early stage researchers about exploring extant research versus exploring the phenomenon? This is the question addressed to
I lean strongly to the latter. I think research should be driven by an interesting question rather than a hypothesis. And when I see doctoral students who sort of list the three main themes in the literature or whatever and say, you know, I think I'll do this one, I think you want to start with a question. Start with a question. I started with a question without realizing. My question is, what the heck do managers do? How are strategies formed? How are decisions really made? And then the literature. Then I look at the literature.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we continue with the hands? Okay. Giro,
Yeah.
please.
Gerald, right?
Giro, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm here.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please go ahead with your question.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to talk to Professor Mintzberg. My question is about balance and imbalance. And so what I'm very curious about is the kind of strategy you could choose to go from one situation of balance to a new situation of balance, in which you feel the need to change the DNA of your organization. So it's not just changing part of your organization, but it's the DNA of your organization.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I haven't addressed that organizationally, but in terms of rebalancing society, if you go on the website, rebalansingsociety.org, and you look, my argument is that the way in which we're going to get balance, and maybe this could be adapted to organizations too, the way in which we're going to get balance is through reformation, not revolution, not not leadership, but through reformation. And I think the Reformation of the 16th century in Martin Luther is a good model. You know, who was Luther? He was an unknown. He was a monk. What was this church? He wrote one piece of paper with 95 theses, mostly a rant, and nailed it to the door of a church. His students took it down, and believe it or not, I don't know how many people realize this, they circulated 200,000 copies of that. Or they and other people circulated 200,000 copies of that using the new, in other words, it went viral, to use today's term, using the new social medium of the time. What was that? It was the printing press. And I think what we need today is a grassroots groundswell of initiatives that challenge what's wrong. How can anybody accept that pharmaceutical companies make these obscene profits while people die for want of those pharmaceuticals? What kind of society tolerates that for 1 minute? I don't deny pharmaceutical companies' profits, but the profits they make based on government-granted monopolies are obscene. And the idea that people die for want of pharmaceuticals that should be available is a condemnation of a sick, sick, sick world.
Well, thank you very much. It's reformation. I'll remember when I continue writing on my thesis.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Okay. Elnaz, please.
Yes, hello. Good morning, evening, and night to some people. Thank you very much for this session, and I'm very honored, like everyone, to be a part of this session. Actually, my question is about my thesis. Subject of my thesis is process of managing bottom-up emergent change with a weak process approach, emergent design method as well.
Sorry?
I mean, a final state that there is a process of such within my data. For now, I have a series of managerial action block that they come all together in dealing with the field level emergence. And by the definition, it's emergent, unplanned, and cannot be directed as it unfolds. So I keep reaching to this conclusion that the managers deal with the outcomes of bottom-up emergent change, either dynamics or consequences. And the process of managing change is managing another episode of change and not the one that emerged and evolved. And when I read your book, Managing and everything, when I put like what managers do, and I try to just connect the dots with each other, I feel like I'm dealing with a paradoxical subject. And so I wonder if I picked my subject correctly, if there is at all a process of managing emergent change as it unfolds within the field. And I would be honored to get your thought about it.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think the key is not only for managers to understand that, but to enable themselves to be in touch, literally to be in touch, to leave their offices, and their secretaries should be putting thumbtacks upside down on their chairs so they can't sit down for part of the day, but have to go around, and not to be seen or to make a show, but to find out what's going on. The head of a supermarket chain who used to go shopping in his stores every Saturday, to see what the customer experience was. It's not very hard. If you're running a cemetery, it's a bit tough to know what the experience of your customers is. But if you're running a retail chain, when I have I have this fantasy that, I don't drink juice much anymore, but when I used to drink juice, there was some juice bottles, you couldn't open them. You needed to be Herculean to open them. And I had this fantasy of consulting for the chief executive of the company, and in the middle say, let's have some of your juice. Here, you open it. And they'll be shocked, or she'll be shocked by this. And then I'll say, I'm going to fire the head of the factory. And I'm going to say, no, fire yourself. If you're not drinking your juice, you're not doing your job.
Okan, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm going to have to this is the longest podcast I've ever had, I think. I'm going to have to stop it soon.
Yeah, it's thank you very much, your time, and for all thought-provoking ideas.
Take one last question, if you like.
Okay, the last one from
and the
Okan.
shortest one, don't worry, Dr. Mintzberg. Thank you so much. And my short question is about the embracing flat hierarchies and remote work. So how do you see the classical manager roles, meaning by interpersonal, informational, decisional, managerial roles evolving in this context?
In the context of what?
About flat hierarchies and remote work. And how do you see the classical manager roles and interpersonal, informational, decisional roles evolving in this context?
Well, I won't make that connection necessarily, but we did do a blog on Zoom calls like this, and one of the comments we made, one of my doctoral students and myself, one of the comments we made is that nobody ever bumped into somebody else at the coffee machine after a Zoom call. In other words, you lose a lot by Zoom. We gain a lot because we couldn't be doing this. I would have to be in an airplane to Istanbul or to Turkey, and even then we wouldn't have all the international people here. So Zoom is wonderful for this, but for brainstorming and coming up with new ideas and sharing and project work, I think there are limitations to that. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Yeah, that's I believe we have asked almost all of questions. Professor Mintzberg, thank you very much for your sharing your time and insights and also perspectives with us today. It's our privilege to hear from you and to engage in such a thought-provoking conversation. And I'd like to also thank all colleagues from Turkish Academy of Management and our international guests, most of them, I believe, from Academy of Management, that everyone contributed with their questions and their reflections. That was really our distinct privilege to be with you, Professor Mintzberg. You are very well known around, and we always, since 1980s, was following your ideas, your books, your articles, and it was thought-provoking for our PhD students. As you have already recognized, everybody tries to develop dissertations that might be thinking on your ideas and your insights, probably.
Thank you.
We wishing you all a great day, evening, or whatever time it's where you are, all participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kadir, and thank you all. It's been stimulating for me too. Wonderful.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Keep well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.